Hello and welcome to the CEO Show here at the CEO Magazine. This is your host, Nick Vaidya. Our guest today is Dr. Atul Varadhachary, the managing partner at Houston's leading early stage life sciences development group called Fannin Innovation Studio. Previously, Atul was the president of the life sciences unit of India's largest private sector company, the Reliance Group, a senior engagement manager with McKinsey & Company, and Atul is a successful serial entrepreneur in the life sciences area. He holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins and a medical degree from University of Mumbai. Fannin Innovation Studio partners with leading innovators in the Texas Medical Center to co-found biomedical and life sciences startups, for which it serves as an experienced management team. The company also hosts and seed funds its own startups. So if you're into biotech or healthcare related ventures, this conversation would help you get a better understanding of the difference between healthcare ventures and others. Let's hear what Atul has to say.
Welcome to the CEO Show. I'm really glad that I'm getting a chance to talk with you, even though I'm not very far off from here, from where you are in Houston. At least we are getting to talk on the screen.
Yes, no, thank you. Appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
Well, I'm particularly interested because you've got an illustrious sort of background, McKinsey engagement manager, and then you headed the Reliance Life Sciences US office as the president. And, you've done multiple biotech ventures. And so you've got an insight into, and now that what you're doing, obviously you have an insight into how to take not just biotech, but any life sciences technology from innovation to commercialization, which is a pretty huge leap as far as I understand. Many businesses or innovations fall through the chasm, so to speak.
Right. And I think that's really a huge need in places like Houston or Dallas or Austin, where we have a lot of innovation. Right. This is the challenge in life sciences, is that we have huge amounts of innovation in these, great medical centers. We have a lot of clinical activities. We have great research institutions. But that middle piece of taking the basic research and bringing it to a stage, which is kind of the early development, that, to your point, really falls through the chasm. And the challenge has always been, if you go to Boston or you go to San Francisco, you have this huge innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem of people who've done a lot of early stage development that harvest the technologies from the academic institutions and develop it. In a place like Houston or Dallas or Austin, unfortunately, it kind of falls through the cracks. And that's the challenge which we're trying to address.
And I understand that you've created I wouldn't call it necessarily unique, but reasonably specialized model that you've got a single team for multiple, if you call engagements or multiple startups. So in a sense, you have these specialists in different domains, so to speak, not domain particularly, but skill sets.
Right.
And they provide oversight to each of these ventures.
Right, and that's exactly right. So it's what we call a studio, because in some ways, even though that's what we do, because there are a lot of people, a lot of places, whether it's VCs who kind of help mentor people, or accelerators, incubators, or even academic institutions that have a model where they try to help successful scientists become good entrepreneurs. But the challenge is, if you really look at many of the really great scientists, they enjoy doing their research. That's what they're great at. That's what they want to do. So they don't particularly want to become entrepreneurs. And so our approach is a little bit different. We basically we recognize, they're great at research, but what we're good at is kind of the early drug development, the entrepreneurship, the building the early stage companies. So it's a true partnership. So we work with these innovators. We say, okay, you continue to push the science. We push the business, regulatory, all of the pieces, including talking to the pharma people and the device people. And together we advance the technologies through those very early stages to the point where it's something that could be attractive from a pharma or device point of view. And that's, I think, what's unusual about our model is that we put in a little bit of seed capital. Yes, we host the people. We kind of have the people here. But to your point, we actually serve as the active management team in a pooled model. So totally among all of us, we have people with different skill sets, and then we are able to apply that as appropriate across all of the portfolio companies. And the reason that works is in life sciences, biotech, unlike, for example, in software, you actually don't benefit that much from a dedicated management team in the very early stages of development.
Because the bulk of the work is still dedicated towards the product development.
Yes. And so that's why you do need experienced people early on, because you have to understand what the FDA wants, what pharma wants, but you don't require a dedicated team. So we can actually do very efficiently. We can work with multiple companies, and treat them almost, they're separate companies, but we almost treat them as separate projects. and then we run it. And doing that actually has several additional benefits. But that's really the reason we started, is because we lacked that experienced management team. So that becomes a scarce resource, and that's what we use.
Now, going back to Boston, for example, you mentioned, and Boston does have a lot of thriving biotech community, and certainly the Silicon Valley. What's the difference? Why are they more successful compared to, let's say, Austin, Houston, Dallas, as you talked? Is it because the kind of environment, like you mentioned, the ecosystem, so to speak, but is there really a component of the commercialization team that's missing?
No, that's a great question. And our hypothesis is that if you look at all of these places, whether it's Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, even New York, you have pharma companies, New Jersey, you have pharma companies, you have large biotech companies. And these companies actually have people who've gone through the early development process. So they then spit out those people. So it's all part of, so if you go back to Silicon Valley many years ago, right, it was things like HP that created these engineers who knew how to do early stage development. So same thing in life sciences, even more so than technology or software, you need to have people who understand what it is that the FDA looks for, because most of what we do is the regulated elements, which requires going through the FDA. And that's something which you learn by doing. It's an apprenticeship. So since we don't have any biotech, big pharma companies in town, it means we don't have that ecosystem of people who have that experience. So what we end up having is that you have graduate students and postdocs or junior faculty who have great ideas and try to start companies around it. But their understanding of what you do in terms of research is really what they do in an academic lab. And so they often end up replicating what they do in an academic setting rather than doing what it is that is expected in a business setting. And the analogy I often give is, you wouldn't expect the head of geophysics at the University of Houston to go dig an oil well. So, to say that you expect that some who's a great researcher would actually know what to do in early biotech, that's not reasonable. So I think that's really the challenge. And the beauty, if that is the answer, then it means that as we get more of the people who are actually involved in doing early stage development, it becomes a self-feeding process. And so we can continue to grow the ecosystem, which we've been doing for the last 8 years.
So what happens to those scientists or those ideas, those innovations that seem to be blooming and then fizzle out? So if you don't have the skill set needed in your system in place, such as managing FDA requirements,
right?
Do they slowly just fizzle out? Do they run out of money? What happens to them?
So I think three things happen. One is, and the majority of the companies don't even get started because there is no management team, there's no money. So many of these ideas kind of almost fizzle out before they even get started. A few of them actually end up being interesting enough, and then a VC will come in and say, this is really interesting science, it's a new area. Then those companies end up moving to the East Coast or West Coast. Unfortunately, a relatively small minority. But the majority is what you said. Effectively, they continue doing work, and at some point they run out of money. And at that point, they've not hit the milestones which is expected from a development point of view. So it becomes more difficult to raise more money. So that's unfortunately what happens to a lot of the technology. Either it never gets started, or if it does, it kind of dies before it reaches meaningful milestones.
So from ideation to commercialization, there is this FDA that you talked about, which is a big hurdle and a bunch of milestones and trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, or whatever else they're called. Is there more to it? Or is FDA the primary impediment?
I don't know that I would call FDA is a very important. I think there are the two big stakeholders in this space are FDA and the pharma device companies. Because when you think about it, our customers really are the pharma device companies. As you said, if you look at the overall drug development, again, if I take drugs as an example, you look at the overall drug development process, at some point when you get to the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical studies, the cost becomes really high. So at that point, you really need a pharma partner. So they're really your ultimate customer. It's not the patient who actually takes it. Right. So that means you have to do in your early development, you have to understand what it is that needs to be done where it becomes attractive to your development partner. And since the development partners are so focused on what is the FDA also expects, that's an important piece. So I wouldn't call it so much a hurdle as there are things that are expected, because you or I would not want a drug to be given to a patient unless its safety has been well established, it's being manufactured in a consistent way, you understand exactly what the manufacturing process is, you make sure that your products are made in what is called a GMP method. So all of those pieces, which are really less about the science and more about making sure it's something that's safe and be appropriate to give to patients. All of that needs to get done, and that's completely separate from what you do as a scientist to really understand the science. So those are the pieces that often don't happen.
Does that apply to devices as well, or only to drugs?
It applies to devices too. The devices, you have multiple classes of devices ranging from very simple devices where you just have to follow reasonable regulatory processes and report to the FDA, to the 510K, which is kind of the mid-level, which is it's not really complicated. You have to show that you're similar to something on the market, to finally the things which are called PMA, which is like really the complex devices that are more like drugs. So in each of these, the overall pathway is similar, but the level of complexity is different. So really a brand new novel device, for example, a new heart pump, right? That really is going to go through a lot what you expect for a drug as well before you can bring it into patients. So that is very similar, but something if you want to make a new pair of gloves, for example, that's relatively straightforward. It falls much closer to the consumer kind of complexity. So, but depending on what kind of devices you want to make, and the more complex the device is, obviously the more attractive it usually tends to be from an economic point of view. But it also means that you have to know what it is you have to do to get to the FDA milestones.
So getting to the level of readiness for commercialization itself is a big task or a big achievement.
It is.
Where you're partnering with another company that is providing you the wherewithal to take it to the next level to the end user.
Right. And that's really our model, because the other element of our model, which we didn't talk about, is that what we do is we partner with our innovators, basically our partners with whom we co-found the companies, our scientific innovators, and we work together to go after things like grant funding, non-dilutive but lightly dilutive funding. And so that is, the amount of money is actually, there's quite a bit of money available, but it's not enough to take it all the way to commercialization. So really our model sweet spot is to take it to, for example, as you said, kind of a phase 1, phase 2A kind of setting, which is when the additional costs go up exponentially. And so to bring it up to that point, really de-risk it enough from a pharma partner point of view, so that we're well in the clinical development, but we're not yet at commercialization. I mean, at that point, it's still another 5 years to full commercialization. And that's going to take, many, many tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. So we bring it to that point, and then we look for a partner.
Right. So if you look at these ideas that you come across, a certain percentage will survive and be successful. Mm-hmm. Bulk of them will not reach the market. And it will be many reasons because of the process delays or process impediments. There would also be that the competitive product comes around and you're late to market.
Right.
You could be early to market and it doesn't make it.
Right.
So from your perspective, how would you broadly classify ideas?
So it's a great question. I think, again, the other challenge, of course, is that the stage at which we start working with scientists, it's often 10, 12 years away from commercialization. So the challenge is, anybody who thinks that they can predict what the market looks like in 12, 15 years, is maybe fooling themselves, right? So that's part of our challenge in our space, is that you're actually going in and doing things when you don't even when you've got a product that you're bringing to the market next year, to fully understand what the landscape is can be complicated. Now you're trying to predict 10, 12 years ahead of time. So we actually don't even try to do that, don't even pretend that we understand really what the competitive landscape will be and what the reimbursement, et cetera, will be. So our screening process is a little bit different. What we look for is we look for scientists doing really new, innovative research in a new area. We look for research that's been validated. The whole NIH and NSF, they have this very complex process where they look at grants, they look at applications, they look at the peer review publications. So there's this entire ecosystem that validates science. So we basically piggyback on that. So we look for science that is new, that has been validated through publications and grants. Then we look for grants, look for ideas that have a lot of optionality, because like you said, so many of these ideas fail early on. So we look for science which could have 3, 4 potential different indications, so that at least one of them may work. And then finally, one of our most important screens is that we have to feel like we have good relationships with the innovators with whom we partner. Because this is almost like a marriage. We're going to be working with those people very closely for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, right? And so it needs to be somebody that we feel like there's a mutual respect, there's good chemistry. So those are really our screens. Because I think you make a great point about, there are a lot of commercial reasons why why these things fail. So we're really focused on saying, okay, let's try to mitigate the scientific reasons why these things fail. And then we hope that, the pharma part, and, hope that by the time we get to the stage where you can start thinking about more intelligently about commercial reasons, then, we've already moved science forward quite a bit. So it's a slightly different approach.
So this is different. Obviously, it's not so much market driven because, again,
Yes.
there's so many ideas that are possible, and you just play the roulette.
Right.
And say we'll do all the right things, and we'll see how the probability pans out, and hopefully we will hit a few successes that gets us a lot of returns.
Right.
And if the others fail, that's all right, because that's the name of the game.
Right. And of course, as you know, unlike in many other places, unlike with if I have an iPhone, then I'm unlikely to also have an Android. But if I have cancer, for example, unfortunately, the reality is most patients with metastatic cancer are at some point going to fail their first line of therapy. So in medicine, in many cases, even though you might have a competitor, you basically may end up being a second line, third line. There are patients who end up developing resistance, or patients who end up not responding anymore, or subsets of patients who don't respond. So there are actually many ways in which you can carve out a role, even in a space where there are lots of other players in there. And that's kind of
there's so many confounding variables that you just don't know what will work where.
Exactly.
And that, especially in pharmaceutical, and I don't know so much about devices, but that's the case with pharmaceuticals, and especially new cutting edge stuff where you really don't understand the process, how things work. I mean, you have very little idea, in fact.
Right. And so the key really is to try to make sure you understand the science as solidly as you can early on, so that when you get into the clinical stage, when you're testing patients in the phase 2 studies, that's really when you need to make a decision about which patient population do you go after, how do you treat it, how does it compare with other drugs that might already be there or in the pipeline. So all of those decisions really get made when you're in that phase 2 setting. But the better your science is before that, the more you can make those decisions intelligently. So that's really what we try to do, is try to make sure we bring the science to the stage where you can make really intelligent decisions in phase 2, which may be us, maybe our pharma partner.
So essentially what you're providing is a process roadmap, that here's a system, let's follow the system, and by doing so, you will mitigate your chances of failure, and you're going to have a greater chance of success. Doesn't mean that you will or will not, because there's so much out there that's unknown. But at this point in time, you follow the process, and you provide the wherewithal to create, then put the process in place.
Right. And I think that's exactly right, with one additional tweak, which is the process changes all the time. So part of the conversations that we are constantly having discussions with the pharma partners and device partners to understand what it is they're looking for. So the more guidance we can get from them, more engagement we can get with them. Same thing, talk to the FDA, because the process today and the priorities might be different today than it was a year ago, and it'll be different again a year from now. So it's actually really important to, it's similar to testing any consumer device with your consumers. So in this case, our consumers are really the pharma device companies and the FDA. So we kind of tweak the process continuously based on that kind of feedback.
So you also create that partnership amongst the stakeholders to say, we collaborate, we are the center point, and we will get the right information that is needed on a continuous basis, which one single startup may not be able to create. But if you have a plethora of them, a series of them coming together to you, even the partners, the pharmaceutical companies and device manufacturers will say, you need to be engaged with these guys, because who knows where the next big hit is going to come from.
And I think that's exactly right. Plus, they like the idea that it's a portfolio that they're looking at.
Right.
And I think the other thing just to remember is that pharma companies, and you know this, but if you look in the last decade, pharma companies have reduced the amount of basic research that they're doing, right? And so they're increasingly dependent on the basic innovation to come from the academic centers. So they want access to everywhere they can get the research. And the problem is, if they go Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, there are half a dozen places where that innovation is accessible to them, because you have an ecosystem that takes the innovation from the academic centers and brings it to the stage where pharma companies can access it. In places like Houston, that doesn't happen. And so pharma actually really likes the idea that there's an alternative process that helps them be able to understand technology that, they have no way of talking to the scientists directly, finding out really what the basic science is. They'll pick up a few things here and there. You have tech transfer offices that do a great job of taking some of the most promising research and trying to see if pharma wants to license it. But the bulk of the, the day-to-day research, they actually have no way of accessing it. And so that's why I think they're excited about partnering, collaborating with us to try to figure out what else is happening.
No, obviously, I mean, there's so much of research coming out, and it's hard for anyone to keep track. You need a group of people who are mining through and recognizing for what it needs to be. I believe universities also have centers similar to yours, the larger ones. I believe UT Austin has a system similar to yours. I don't remember the name, but I've come across something like that. Is that true?
So I think you're right. I think many universities, I mean, all the top universities recognize this issue that we're talking about as being a big issue, right? Is if you don't take this basic science, a really innovative basic science, and find a way to commercialize it, you're not helping any of the stakeholders, right? Because at the end of the day, research is only good when it helps a patient.
Right.
And so they keep trying to do different ways to do that, and they have lots of different programs. The challenge always, I think, remains is that by the nature of what universities do, they tend to have people who are researchers. They tend not to have the people who are the commercializers, right? And some of the universities are trying to build that within it, but a lot of the focus historically has been on saying, how do we help our academics who are interested in commercializing, give them a hand up, give them maybe some seed funding, give them some advice, give them some mentoring. So I think all of those pieces are important, and they actually work well for those academic researchers who like to do the commercialization. Our sweet spot is the 80% or 90% of them who really don't want to say, I don't want to start a company, I don't want to go do this, I just want to do my research, which is what I enjoy. And so those are the people that so it's, so what we do is very complementary to what the universities do. The tech transfer organizations are very comfortable with our model because it complements what they do.
Interesting. Now, within this region, do you have a competitor, the incubators or anything of that sort, or are you uniquely positioned?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have competitors. I'd love to have 10 people doing what we do, because there's so much technology that's available. But this is a model that we've now been developing it for 8 years. We'd like to see others do it because I think it's really important. I mean, our primary goal in doing all of this, obviously, we'd like to make money, but it's also to see some of this technology coming and helping patients. But we hope that as it becomes more obvious that our model works, that more people will start following it. But I think that's still some time away. So right now, at least that I'm aware of, there's nobody else, at least in Houston, doing what we do.
Right.
But we'd
So
like
what are your key challenges at this time? What are the 3 things you wish a magic wand could take care of?
Well, great question. I think the first challenge, of course, always, right, it's people. End of the day, even though we have a distributed, pooled, shared management team model, we still need, we're planning to start maybe 15, 20 companies in the next 3 to 5 years, which is it's a significant number of companies. And so we'll need to make sure that we build additional resources, additional people who can actually do that. The challenge is it's hard to move a really successful mid to late career entrepreneur from one city to the other, right? Unlike in an academic setting, if I'm an academician, I work with my peers who are across the world. So if I have to move from New York to Houston or San Francisco to Dallas, 80% of the people I work with are still the same ones that I meet at my conferences, all the different ways. But if I'm an entrepreneur, I have my local ecosystem, whether it's my inventors, my investors, my service providers, all of those people, they're all part of my ecosystem. So it's very hard to move those people into Houston, for example. I think if you have enough opportunities, you can. So we've really focused on building our own entrepreneurs, if you will. And that actually gets to the other point, which is, again, if I look in Houston, we have probably about 5,000 graduate students and postdocs. It's a large number of people. These are all MDs, PhDs, scientists, many of whom have an interest in doing development. And today they really don't have an opportunity to do that. So our internship program, they come, they work with us for a day, day and a half a week. For about 3 to 6 months, and they get embedded within one of our portfolio companies or within Fannin, and they actually get hands-on experience doing the development. And it's great for us because these are people that kind of contribute to our ecosystem, both locally within Fannin and within Houston. So we've had 35 of these people in the last 5 years. 7 or 8 of them are running their own biotech companies. Many others are within Fannin on our portfolio companies. Others are doing other things. So we're kind of trying to grow that ecosystem of people, but that still remains our number one challenge in terms of having enough people to be able to address as many opportunities as there are.
And are you talking about the scientists who are in the product development, or are the business people who are communicating with the stakeholders and going through the processes required for FDA and also for the pharmaceutical companies?
So in our model, so if you look especially in the drugs and the more complex devices, the people who are the business people actually need to have a strong scientific background. So we're looking at the scientists who want to become the business people, regulatory people, actually do the development. So those are the people. So it's not the primary scientists, because there's no shortage of the innovation coming from the senior scientists. It is kind of the younger scientists who actually become good at doing drug development. People like myself, right? So I have a medical degree and a PhD, but those are more critical to the role that I can play from a development point of view. So it's that resource that we're trying to grow. That those are kind of our interns and our fellows. So I think that's our number one limiting resource. And I think the second one, which we are working hard towards addressing right now, is to get into relationships with more of the pharma companies, for them to, on a more sustained basis, a small group of them, provide us input both in terms of saying, okay, which projects do we go after, which targets do they get excited about, provide guidance in terms of the early discussion about, okay, here are the critical experiments that we'd like to see, so that we only do the half a dozen experiments the partner wants to see, rather than 50 experiments of which only half a dozen might be relevant. Right. So I think we've had had multiple discussions with a number of partners. I think people are excited about what we do, and so that's a relationship that we have to continue to grow and deepen. So I think those are our
meet people who understand both the business side as well as the research side, and some of those may be more specific to one company than the other one. So relationship managers, so to speak.
Yes.
Who can communicate between the two groups.
Right. And I think the third piece is really continue to reach out to the innovators and find the technology. I mean, we have no shortage of that. We have probably 10 times as many interesting technologies as we can develop right now. But still the process of talking to investigators, finding out really what is a brand new science that's not yet hit the front page of the New York Times. That's kind of the areas which we focus on.
Excellent. Wonderful. Atul, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I think these are some great ideas that you are pursuing. And a lot of people who are interested in what you're doing would enjoy your video and get a sense of exactly what you're doing and how they might want to think about it, especially in the Houston area or this area, the Austin, San Antonio, right. Dallas, because San Antonio also has a huge research community.
It does. And they actually have, especially on the device side, they're pretty strong.
Right. They have a company, I don't remember what's the name of it, but a big device and bed manufacturer, I think, in San Antonio.
Right. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to talk to anybody else who's interested in learning more about what we do.
Wonderful. You take care and enjoy your weekend.
Oh, you too. Bye. Bye.